Hello friends, today we have a new dev diary by Paradox for Crusader Kings 3. Now in this dev diary they discussed becoming a polyglot. Now what is a polyglot? A polyglot is a person who knows multiple languages. So why would this be important? Well, in previous dev diaries, Paradox has discussed the fact that during the royal court, the languages that you know and how you can communicate with your courtiers and your other guests will be very important in terms of the events. So that's definitely going to be, knowing multiple languages is going to definitely be important. And in this dev diary, they discuss not only how you learn new languages, which is great, but also some other effects to it and how learning might be getting a little bit of buff. Now, last week we didn't do a dev diary review, and we didn't do that because the dev diary was just about music. I hope you checked it out. If you didn't, both last week's and this week's dev diary will be in the description. And I'm also going to put at the end of the video the new music that they teased for the upcoming Royal Court expansion. All right, let's get into this. Greetings! As you all know, one of the new cultural pillars each culture has is their native language. Now, what effect does the language have? At its core, language affects the baseline acceptance between cultures. If two cultures share the same language pillars, they will like each other better. But that's not all. Characters also learn additional languages. So right there we have that they're bringing an opinion to the opinion modifiers to the culture between cultures, which is good. It won't be just you are a different culture, we hate you, right? So that's going to be very interesting. So why do you want to learn a language? Knowing a language cuts the rather hefty opinion penalty, oh, there it is right there, for different cultures in half, both for characters and counties. Planning on conquering a foreign kingdom? Start your conquest by mastering their language, making subsequent control of your new subjects just that much easier. The less accepted your culture is, the more impact learning a language will have. Now, usually when I'm playing Italy, what I like doing is I like going after Africa, and I like doing holy wars versus Africa and expanding my realm in Africa. This way I can get some additional levies and some additional income. However, I always have a problem anytime that I do a kingdom war against Africa. We end up having a huge culture and kingdom negative opinion modifier, and this quite often builds into a faction. Now, if we can prepare by learning the language of the kingdom that we're going for, this could potentially prevent a faction from rising or becoming as powerful. Now, that assumes that that entire kingdom shares a religion or language, and assuming they do share a language, then this would be a huge benefit to us and may actually have us prepare sooner for our kingdom wars, right? You wouldn't want to, when you go to invade a county or a duchy, you don't need to prepare by learning the language, especially if you're an empire, right? The factions that are going to raise up out there, they're not really that big of a deal. You can deal with them with slow conversions, or by assigning zealous vassals that'll convert them really fast. Right, so for the counties and duchies, this isn't going to become important, but as soon as we move into those kingdom wars, right, where we start getting those factions to spring up really fast, this will allow us to prepare in advance and then quickly move on to the next war, right? So we're not actually hampered down by quickly having to deal with a populist faction, or even worse, if new vassals go and join that populist faction, it may not be such a quick war, so that you're going to have to deal with. But definitely interesting thing that we have here. All right, so let's move on now. Now for the more pertinent question, how do you learn language? You learn a language through scheming. Okay, this kind of makes sense because well, it's not really a scheme. It just kind of fits the scheme, infrastructure, right? The event systems from the schemes, it just fits nicely into there. So it kind of makes sense that they're putting the learning of the language in the scheme. Learn language is a learning-based scheme where progress and chance of a success are primarily derived from how scholarly your character is. This scheme is available to everyone, even young children. That is really good. So often when you are a child, you cannot go and do so many different schemes against people, and you can't even sway people. It makes it really hard to play as a child. So being able to do a scheme where you learn the language of, say, some vassals, then that isn't that big of a deal. This part actually gets quite interesting, this next part. Who has a vastly increased chance of success / progress by the virtue of being young, less tired, and having working brains. I feel like that's a shot at us old people. Oh well. But no, this is true, right? Language skills are quite often developed in a younger age. Trust me, I have a son who is quite young, and he picks up on languages a lot faster than what I can. Now, he'll probably lose them by the time that he gets my age, because he won't be practicing them. But yeah, he picked up several phrases from several different languages, and he's only 5 years old, which is kind of cool. But I digress. It targets someone who natively speaks the language, of course, having you try to emulate them. While the exact target you choose is less important than in other types of schemes, you might still get an opportunity to interact with them. Okay, that's good. That's good. It makes sense that you would have the scheme system has events that come up. They don't always come up, right? So I assume that's what they mean by you might still get the opportunity, right? You may interact with them. You might not. Not all murder schemes, as an example, you actually interact with them. Now, if you're in a sway scheme, like the positive schemes, I don't think they work exactly that way. Yeah, the positive schemes, I've always had an event from them. So that would be very interesting if we do not have an event from it. I wonder if it's not an event from that interacts with them, but is another type of event. That's interesting. Interesting wording that they added there. Now, learning the language takes quite some time, though it is possible to significantly speed up the process by employing a court tutor. Another advantage for having a court tutor. 100%. This court tutor seems like it is going to be critical if you are playing any sort of play run through that goes more than one generation. And based on this, they may actually have a position if you are only planning a playthrough on one generation. Now, you don't usually get into Empire, become an empire in one generation unless you start as a kingdom or you start as a empire already. But if you're going from county, usually I can get up to kingdom. I can't get up to empire. Now, I haven't really tried a speed run, so maybe I could. But for the average player, I don't think this will be an issue where you're forced to have a court tutor if you're only planning on playing one generation. You'll also find that bonuses for the scheme have been added throughout the existing lifestyles. Some examples. Okay, interesting. So are we getting replacements for some of the less used and some less important perks? Or are we going to get additional perks, right? Which would actually take us longer to get to the scholar and theologian traits, right? Which we want. Oh man, they could also cause it to have sanctioned loopholes be longer. That could be an issue, is if they do add to those trees, this could be a bit of an issue. And of course, it would go into the scholar tree more than likely. I doubt any of this would go into the theologian tree, and then the health tree, I doubt that as well. I always forget the name of the health tree. If the scheme is invalidated by, for example, the target dying, oops. Speaking of that, I had a weird death just the other day. I had a carp accident while recording some B-roll footage. I was like, what the heck is this? Never had that. Your progress is retained and you get the opportunity to choose a new target. Okay, that makes sense, right? You're going to be resuming. Looks like you have to choose right away a new target. So one question I have is does the target have to be at your court? It doesn't seem like it, or at least in your realm. I could see it being harder to learn a language for someone who is foreign to your realm. When we first talked about languages, we had some people rightfully point out that decreasing the chance of success the more languages you know isn't very logical. We still need a way to prevent characters from knowing all the languages in the world. Why not? I want to know every language. What are there? Several thousand of them? And thus we introduce the concept of foreign language limit. This represents how many languages a character can comfortably remember. Okay, so let's move on. If a character exceeds that foreign limit, they will start getting events about feeling overwhelmed, giving you choice between forgetting a language or gaining stress. Oh man, stress can be such a pain to deal with. In a sense, the system is very similar to how we handle characters having too many lovers. Yeah, that's true. As you get more and more lovers, you have to choose between the lovers, and if you try to maintain multiple of them and you try to keep them all, you get a pretty severe negative severe stress applied to you. Of course, a character can never forget the language that is native to their culture, makes sense, and that language isn't included in the limit, makes sense. As you can see in the above screenshot, Telugu isn't included in the limit as it is his native language. The foreign language limit is affected by many things, but primarily by a character's learning score, where every 5 attribute points it increases the limit by 1. Okay, so this basically increases the importance of intelligence. And in tribal, I don't really see an issue with not having that many languages. However, once you get to feudal, you may want a lot, and already learning is in my opinion the strongest feudal based lifestyle. So this seems like a buff to that tree. To a tree that didn't need it. But of course, where else do you thematically put this in? So it makes sense it's in that tree. I kind of hope that they nerf the tree a tiny bit by doing this, because right now it really makes it so that choosing any other lifestyle in feudal based on what we're seeing here, and of course we're talking about in a vacuum here, right? So there could be a lot of other buffs to the other trees that make them good, but right now if I'm going into feudal and I don't have learning, then maybe I want stewardship depending on where I am, depending on my gold reserve, or I want diplomacy. I don't really want martial, and I don't really want intrigue, right? So it's going to be very interesting that we're buffing a tree that really doesn't need to be, that's already an S tier tree. With this change, we made it so that more languages you know, the higher your success chance is for learning additional languages. Okay, that makes sense. That makes sense. You have the basics down already after all. Yeah, makes sense. If you don't know how to learn a language, makes sense, it'd be easier. Now, of course, that's coming from someone that knows exactly one language. So now, the process of learning language can be quite entertaining. There are many events that can happen along the way, being helped by your friends or family, opposed by rivals, and so on. Here are a handful of examples of what can happen during the learning of your languages. Okay, I'm going to skip most of this, but there was one thing that was very funny in here. Yeah, beware your rivals, lest they release ink-soaked birds in your study. That just seems hilarious to me. There's opportunity to gain trinket slot items, which is kind of cool, which I assume would affect positively your ability to learn languages. And then, of course, sometimes other rulers will offer to help you out for a price, because learning language isn't a secret, right? Whilst you using the scheme system, it's a positive scheme. It isn't a negative scheme, so it's not applying a secret to you. So I definitely recommend checking out the dev diary. I'm looking forward to the system. It is going to, I think that is really going to change my strategy on Kingdom Wars. I prefer my realm being stable, and this will allow me to get into the war and stabilize it before I take those foreign cultures, right? Which is going to be very important. And with that, I'm going to leave you with some music from last week's dev diary, in which they teased us with a bit of the music from the expansion. But with that, good morning, good night, or good day, wherever you are.